Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. In the spirit of the trees, in the spirit of living nature, of which we're a part, with deep gratitude to our ancestors and all the generations that have brought us to the present moment, I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. This is the third of 6 days on the critical issue of mental health and youth, globally considered. We're developing this program in partnership with Noemi Weis, who's the director of the extraordinary documentary Connecting the Dots, and Tom Eddington, who was the executive producer. And we brought together young people who were both in the documentary and also additional people to contemplate the various challenges that are besetting young people around the world at a time when they're under severe duress. Today, we want to explore possibly the most fundamental domain in which young people are both providing leadership and also experiencing persecution and derision and real challenges, and that's the issue of gender. If you think about it, our pandemic is going to pass at some point. The various challenges are going to ebb and flow. But what's happening now at the level of gender and sexuality in the human race may be the most fundamental transformation of human identity for thousands of years. Because something unprecedented is occurring in human gender and human sexuality in our time. If you think about it historically, just for a very brief moment, gender and sexual identities and relations were fairly stable in a patriarchal order that dominated the world for 5,000 to 6,000 years, with important exceptions, mostly with the indigenous peoples. And then after the Second World War, about 75 years ago, something happened that began to radically reshape human gender and sexuality, and that was the rise of the women's movement all over the world, as women began to take control of their lives and demand equality in all kinds of spheres. And out of that came the gay and lesbian movement, as sexuality began to break out of the bounds and strictures of a patriarchal order. And then as things have progressed, gender itself, sexuality itself, has become completely fluid. And experimentation and new forms, new categories of language have been increasingly expressed. And what has been interesting in terms of this transmutation of identity and value is that if you look back into the women's movement and even the gay lesbian movement, the revolution happened largely initially with mature adults. If you think back to the 60s with Bella Abzug in the US Congress and Betty Friedan and et cetera. But as the gender revolution and the sexual revolution has evolved, the demographic has become younger. It's quite extraordinary. The Gen Zs around the world, the millennials, are at the forefront now of the shape shifting of our species as we begin to express ourselves in ways that were almost unimaginable even 30 or 40 years ago, such that even the language that we're using is transmuting. So as I said, in this fundamental revolution, young people worldwide are in the leadership. And also they're experiencing the pushback of the patriarchal culture, which is being dismantled, but it has not yet disappeared. It's not yet given way to this new revolution of human identity. So today we want to explore gender, and we also want to explore sexuality, and we want to explore how young people are both experimenting and leading, and some of the challenges that they're undergoing as they engage in this fundamental reshaping of what it means to be human. Before we dive into this domain, let us pause, as we always do as we begin Humanity Rising, and that is just to come into our bodies. Our gender, our sexuality is how we understand our bodies. And for the next minute or so, let us close our eyes if we can, and let us just focus on our hearts. Through our hearts, the beating of our hearts, let us feel our gender. Let us feel one another. Let us feel the freedom that is now being expressed at the most fundamental category of what it means to be human. Thank you, everyone. Now we want to commence our program by showing you the trailer of the film Connecting the Dots, which is being aired worldwide and coming as it has in the pandemic. It is being focalized through house parties and local events that you can participate in. We encourage all of you to be in touch with the web links that we'll put up in a few minutes so that you can gather your friends and your community to show the film. Because this documentary, Connecting the Dots, which I saw a few months ago, is one of the most powerful treatments of the challenges that young people are being confronted with all around the world as we go through a time of unprecedented complexity, turbulence, and chaos. The young people are really experiencing this in a very deep way. And we need to understand that. And we need to, through our understanding, to be as supportive as we possibly can be, because it's our young people that carry the future. So Georg, if you'll play the trailer, we'll watch that for a couple minutes, and then I'll introduce our moderator for today.
Do people know what mental health is? Do people know what mental illness is?
Every single one of you in here that's battling, every one of you that feels like you're alone, every one of you who feels like nobody understands you, how many of you relate to what I'm talking about? Raise your hand.
There should be some kind of a system that talks about mental health problems in schools, like in lessons, just anywhere really.
They're having to deal with a lot of very, very ill people rather than it being more about prevention.
Youth mental health, it's the same story everywhere I go.
I want to get to the root of it and to really figure out the why from the mouth and the stories of young people.
I can sometimes feel a panic attack. Like I woke up this morning and I knew for a fact I was going to have a panic attack.
I'm taking this because I think if I look in my face, it'll calm me down.
I don't even see myself alive after high school.
People need to hear the truth that most kids our age are not fine.
I never saw myself represented anywhere. I felt like it was very invisible. Not only being a woman, but a Black Muslim woman, I just thought that those problems were for everybody except people like me.
I don't want other young people to feel the way I did growing up. Finally, I have a chance to fight the system.
I think we need to start hearing from young people like myself when making policies related to somebody's mental health.
There are so many things inherent to a space when you build it up properly that help people become more resilient and help people find community. When you make sure a space is safe, where you make sure that everybody feels welcome into a space, people feel like they can be themselves.
I'm telling my story. It's literally making something painful inside beautiful.
So sick of being unhappy because I'm so young, and I feel like I need to be able to experience the world in a positive, healthy way.
I just wanted to be accepted for who I am, and I just wanted to be loved.
It took me 5 years to finally open up about my mental illness, but it wasn't as scary as I thought. It was one of the best things I've ever done.
Young people have to know that even though at times they may feel that they're in the darkness, if they could just know just to hold on, that light is going to come over the horizon.
The minute we start talking about mental illness, when people will not be ashamed.
I just really hope the world could change.
That's the film, Connecting the Dots. You can access it at www.connectingthedotsfilm.com. We encourage any of you that are interested to be in touch through the website to host a house party or any kind of gathering that you can around an issue that is challenging the young people, as you just saw, everywhere in very deep ways. And they need our understanding and they need our support. I want to now introduce our moderator for today. And I want to introduce Michaela Harley. And she was there on Monday and moderated our session there, so needs really no introduction. She works for Frame and has dedicated her life, both because of her own personal experience, but because of her professional expertise in how you empower young people in the mental health system to both be heard and to be healed by including them in the very process through which they're seeking help. So Michaela, welcome to Humanity Rising once again, and I turn the program over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim. It's really lovely to be back on day 3 of the Global Youth Mental Health Summit through Rising Humanity. For all of those who haven't gotten a chance to meet yet on Monday, my name is Michaela Harley, calling in from the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee, Mohawk, and Huron-Wendat, also known by its colonial name of Cornwall, Ontario. I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm really grateful to share in this space with you all. As Jim mentioned, I'm a youth, who has been impacted personally by mental health challenges. I'm also a student in this world and a professional in the field, so I'm really beyond excited to be here and to be a part of this conversation. As you may already know, this week we have a variety of keynotes panel discussions and partner events that will focus on building connections and leading change and learning together. On Monday, we chatted about the state of global youth mental health. And yesterday, we focused on the topic of belonging and community, specifically around creating those safe spaces, where there was a wonderful and lively conversation about a variety of things, including, but certainly not limited to, the reality that we as humans are innately spiritual beings. And we learned that this is even shown through MRI studies. As well, there was the talk about the importance of finding your community and knowing that you're not alone. There was also many beautiful and encouraging sentiments, including that struggle is an invitation, a gateway, if you will, to connection and deeper love if we let it. So there were many beautiful conversations yesterday. And as a reminder, you do have the ability to stream past sessions at your convenience if you missed the previous important conversations. Today, we're focused on gender and questioning, which is an absolutely fundamental topic in the conversation around youth mental health, as gender awareness is a recently new topic, and there are significant gaps in understanding, contributing to the youth mental health crisis for many, many young people. To address this, we need a variety of things, including, but certainly not limited to, learning to safely and effectively discuss this topic, combined with things like information and resources in an effort to support our youth, which is exactly what today's panel is focused on. Before I introduce our wonderful panelists, I also want to remind you about the rest of the week. Tomorrow, we have a really important conversation around environmental anxiety as it relates to youth mental health with many experts, including the world-renowned Dr. Jane Goodall. Then to close the week, we will be talking about parenting and youth mental health on Friday. On Monday, we're back again to focus on bringing mental health and addiction recovery out of the darkness. We hope to see you all at the events throughout the week. Trust me, you do not want to miss the really, really important conversation. All right, so now the kind of housekeeping and intros are out of the way, let's dive in. So I want to take a moment to introduce our fabulous panel of experts today. First, we welcome the wonderful Lexi Shepherd. Some of you may recognize Lexi as one of the inspiring participants in the film Connecting the Dots. Lexi is also a dancer, published author, and member of the LGBTQ+ community. Next, we're also joined by the inspiring Mariana Politi, who you may also recognize from the film Connecting the Dots. Shared that during this experience, she also shared that this was very, very enriching and helped to have a broader and more holistic view of social problems. We're also joined by Shannon Ackerman, who is a senior at Eastern Kentucky University, majoring in psychology with a focus in brain and cognitive science. Shannon participated in the Connecting the Dots documentary during her freshman and sophomore year in college, and her participation in the film contributed heavily to her road on recovery. They're also joined by Suzanne Sherkin, an accomplished mediator, trainer, and public speaker in the areas of conflict resolution and gender equity. She recently published her first book, When Gender is in Question, A Guide to Understanding, when her youngest child began their deeply personal journey to transitioning to their authentic gender identity. We're also joined today by the fabulous Noemi Weis, who is an award-winning writer, director, and producer who has spent over 20 years telling stories on the big and small screen, including but not limited to the Connecting the Dots film. Fun fact, she has been honored with an invitation to meet the Pope, Pope Francis, at the Vatican in recognition of the impact of her films on the global community scale. And finally, we're joined by Tom Eddington, who is an author, executive coach, business advisor, and executive producer of Connecting the Dots. As a scholar of conscious leadership, he is passionate about bringing more conscious leadership into the world, which he does through his coaching and advisory work, film and media projects, and board presentations. I want to take pause and thank each and every one of our panelists for being here today to offer their perspectives and experiences in the quest of propelling the state of youth mental health forward. So thank each of you for being here. For our panel today, I'll leave space open for conversation, and I'll also layer in questions that come up and any audience questions that are put in the chat. So I'll be sure to monitor that as best as I can. With that, let's jump in. Susan, if you don't mind, I wondered if you could start us off by sharing some of your work, including maybe what called you to this work, what you've learned so far, those sorts of things that will help us to kind of set the stage for our conversation today.
Thank you, Michaela. I'm happy to begin, but before I begin, I just really want to acknowledge Jim, who started this off with such a really beautiful and expansive and thoughtful introduction. So thank you, Jim. You've put some amazing language into this arena of thinking. And you identified such important pieces about where we are right now, about how gender identity and sexual orientation, yes, and specifically gender identity, is shifting, and how our thoughts around that are shifting, and how it's particularly impacting young people and the language they give and the relationships they have with themselves and with others. So within that context, I want to just give a little bit of an introduction, because I'm excited to be in conversation with all these wonderful folks about, 10, 15 years ago, I guess. This was before Caitlyn Jenner, before Orange is the New Black, before the word transgender was even a word in the public dialogue. My youngest child, who was then in first year university and 20, let's say, came to me and said, "Ma, I want to share some videos with you." I don't think they used the word video. Maybe it was blogs. I want to share some stuff on my computer with you. And I said, okay. And so I thought, oh, great, we're going to have a film time together. And I thought, oh, great, should I make popcorn? Should I get into my jammies? And it was really exciting, because I was going to have like a one-to-one time with my kid, who I really loved, the youngest of two, and they'd been away at university for months, and I just was, so it's great. So we set up on their bed, and shoulder to shoulder, lifted up the laptop, and suddenly, and I was expecting, la-di-da. What I ended up seeing was something very different. I ended up, we began watching these young people, sort of 10-minute pieces at a time, speaking very directly, very boldly and boldly into the camera about their gender questioning, about how they were considering, reviewing, reassessing their own relationship to their bodies and their gender. And some of these videos had young people lift up their shirt. There was one that I so remember. It was a young person who lifted up their shirt, and there were scars where their breasts had been, really nasty scars. It looked like they had had the operation, an hour before. Really nasty scars. It looked so painful. And yet on their face was this angelic pride. After maybe 15 minutes, I turned to my child and I said, "What are we watching here?" And my child said to me, "Ma, I think I'm a guy. I think that's what's been going on all these years." And therein began this journey for me, for my family, an older sister and a husband, the four of us, and my child, who then had been identified female and now knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that their true gender identity was male. I had no idea about any of this. I had never thought about gender. I am what I now know is a cisgender woman, someone who does not question the gender I was born into. I was born female with female genitalia, female chromosomes, treated as a female, and I have lived very happily as a female. Yes, I have different expressions. I push my own limits. I ride a Harley, which is not within a traditional female role. I do lots of other things which may not be considered conventionally female, but I've never questioned my gender identity. I didn't even know that was something that you did. And here began this long conversation, and it was a struggle. I can tell you that 6 months before, our child Skylar, is his chosen name. Skylar had come to us before he transitioned, and while he was still showing up as a female, came to us and announced that they were gay. And that was completely a non-issue. So they said that at the dinner table, and it was like, okay, great. Pass the salt. Let's have dessert. That's great. There was absolutely no issue about that. And so now when he came with this, it was a very different kind of a discussion, and one that raised significant conversations and subsequent new considerations, because it involved surgery. As it turned out, it involved hormones. It involved a whole change of presentation. And so it required that the family, and each of us individually and as a family unit, pivot and integrate new ideas. I can tell you that my recollection was that I was immediately welcoming, but apparently not so. Apparently, in a subsequent interview, I actually interviewed Skylar some years later when I was beginning to do my book, and I interviewed him about the process, and he refreshed my memory that, no, Ma, you weren't so on side at the beginning. It took a little while. And so we all like to think that we are very liberal immediately, but it took me a little while. And then but the family was very embracing and very supportive. And when things, a number of years later, when things settled and Skylar is now happy, healthy psychotherapist, artist, so in his skin and so happy in his being, I decided that I would write the book that I wished I'd had 10 years ago when I was going through this. Because when I began this journey, there were resources, absolutely, but most of them were written by trans people or people who were the ones questioning their own gender. There was none, and very, very few written by cis people. And I, as a former journalist, a writer, an editor, communicator, I knew I had the skills, the energy, and the experience to do it. And so I stepped into that realm. So I published the book last year. It had taken me 4 years to write it. So we're talking, 5 years ago now. And I can tell you that it took me 4 years because I put the book away many times, because there I was in my own little office. I don't know, just doing my own thing. Nobody was talking about it in the world, at least not in my communities. And I thought, this is an irrelevant topic. I mean, nobody's going to be interested in this. And so I put it away on the shelf. Like I put it, and I had all my files behind. I just literally put it behind me. And then I would sit with it for 3-4 months, and it kept coming up. And so then I pulled it out, and then I did it again. I must have put it away 3 times. for months at a time because I thought nobody's going to read this thing. As it turned out, when I eventually published it, it was a topic that was now out in the open. And I'm beyond thrilled to know that it is a publicly discussed topic to which we are here together today. And so the book, very briefly, and then I'll pass the torch back to you, Michaela. Very briefly, the book outlines some of the key ideas of what gender questioning is about and identifies the differences between gender identity, sexual orientation, and goes through some of the language. I interviewed hundreds of people around the country, young people and older people in transition at different stages in their life to get a sense of it. And I'm now I use this book, this understanding to in workplaces to help integrate employees who are transitioning. I work with families to help them facilitate difficult conversations. And I am as much of an active advocate for gender diversity. I'm struggling with that word. To speak about the spectrum of gender identity. That's really what this is about. To speak about the spectrum of gender identity, because the majority of people are on the planet are cisgender, and it's kind of like fish in water. You don't know you're in water, and so those of us who are cisgender often don't think about not being comfortable with the gender that we are born into. And my work, part of my work here on this planet I see, is to help invite people into that conversation, not to shift their identity, but to certainly open their understanding and awareness and sensitivity to gender questioning. So with that, I pass it on to Michaela and look forward to conversations as we progress today.
Thank you, Susan. And wow, thank you so much for sharing, both coming from your perspective as a mother, supporting Skylar, and a leader in the field. As you were speaking, I was thinking, you modeled so beautifully what it means to hold space as a parent, supporting a child through their journey. You also shared so many great themes of centering yourself and critically reflecting about your positionality in these conversations. You also brought forward, important conversations and considerations around some of the psychological and biological aspects of these conversations that are all, natural in these topics. And you highlighted the important reality of how supporting a loved one in their gender journey allows you to see them become into the person that they were always meant to become, which is, absolutely beautiful. And I want to thank you also for publishing such a profound book, one that I'm really excited to read, so I can learn more and become the best ally possible. With that, I would like to open it up to our panel discussion now. And I'm wondering right off the bat, folks, if any of our panelists have any thoughts or reflections around the work that Suzanne has shared, whether that be from your own stories, from your own experiences, if you have any or are comfortable, or the work that you all lead. So I'll take pause there. Yeah, Mariana.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you, Michaela. Thank you, Suzanne, for such a beautiful testimony. And it really, what you said reminded me of my story. And I think this is the beautiful thing about talking about these subjects, not only gender, but when you address something about mental health, I think we all feel included and touched somehow, because maybe it's not that specific thing, but something similar may have happened to any of us. And it happened to me when I came out as lesbian with my parents. Oh my God, I felt like it was this big thing, and it was this like secret that I kept to myself for many, many years. And I lived in different countries. I am from Argentina. I was born here, But because of my dad's work, I lived in Bolivia and I lived in Ecuador, which are Latin American countries that are very like more traditional and closed, and they don't have like open discussions about human rights. I mean, they do now more, but it's still tough on those countries. And I'm lucky now that I live in Argentina. Like I'm back in my country, that I find it to be more flexible and more open, but it's still a thing. It's still a struggle. It's still weird for people to see two same-sex couples walking down the street holding hands, and we still have trans brutality, which is horrible. But what you said about writing the book that you wish you had, I think that's beautiful. And I think for me, what you were saying about your story with my parents, I also felt like there was like initial concern maybe, and I felt very like lonely on those first stages of my accepting who I was. Because the thing with this is you don't only have to come out to the world for them to accept you, it's also you have to accept yourself. And sometimes that's not something so easy or so linear. Like sometimes you're fine and then everything comes back, and it's a process. And I feel like my parents, maybe it's not like they were bad or they were evil. They just didn't know. They were just worried that I might suffer, or worried that when they grew up, those things were just a phase, you know? It's just like, it's something that's, it's gonna go by and you're gonna be normal. And so I felt like that was the initial reaction from my parents. They thought that it was just a phase and that was gonna grow out of it. And I feel like it's so important for us to be able to recognize in our own stories that we went through that. Like my mom said that when she was younger, she also questioned her sexuality, but she never gave attention to it. And I feel like it's something we all go through, but some people choose not to give attention to it because it's not going to be considered normal. It's not going to be considered something that they can actually go through with. So it's so important for people to talk about themselves and about their stories, because I feel like we can all feel identified, because we're all human and we all have those like feelings and go through similar things. That like your testimony just brought so many things that I didn't remember, and that I am happy to stay with and reflect, and it might help me with my journey. And I think it's a beautiful thing. So thank you, Suzanne.
I just really briefly, Marianne, I love what you say, that it's this journey is about accepting yourself initially. And what I have found really briefly, and then I'll turn it back to Michaela, is that all the people I interviewed, and I interviewed people all over the country and in different countries and different ages, I found, and whether they were transitioning from questioning from male to female, female to male, or being gender fluid, the one thing I found in common was that each and every one of these individuals honored their own questioning and allowed themselves to give voice to their questioning. Some not with any certainty, some with no safety, as you've identified being in Argentina, but all of them, without exception, questioned their own identity and valued it and didn't judge themselves for questioning it. And that is what I have found to be a profound common thread among those who are gender questioning. They value their own questioning and give voice to it to whatever degree they can.
Wonderful. Thank you, folks, so far. Noemi, Lexi, Shannon, Tom, I wonder, how is this resonating with you?
So
it's really what it's resonating with me. So I live in the US first and foremost. So hi, I'm Shannon. Mariana, amazing. I loved listening to you and your story. It was amazing. And Suzanne, thank you so much. It's all briefly. So here in the US, I don't know very much. I sound very United States right now, but I don't know about other countries right now. But it's Pride Month here. And so I remember I was just sitting, actually, this is so weird. I didn't know that this was the panel discussion for today, but yesterday I was sitting at work and we were talking, and what they were talking about was how angry they were about Pride Month and how mad they couldn't stand and how selfish it was for people to be within pride with like loving who they loved. And all I could think, I couldn't say anything because all I could think, like, because as someone who is a bisexual woman, all I could think was, why is this affecting you? How is this affecting you? Because the one thing they said is these people don't care who they hurt. That was the first thing I thought. Now, I have family members who have transitioned. I have very gay lesbian family members. My godmother, she's lesbian. My mother, my mother broke her arm giving birth to me, and I had a very big head. And so there were many things that have happened, and all I could sit and think was, my family has been a very accepting, and I live in the state of Kentucky, if that tells you anything. And all I could think was, I've faced homophobia before. There's homophobia everywhere, and there's transphobia. There's a lot of things like that, but I've never usually like sat in the room. I've never always just walked away from it, but I've never sat in a room and just listened to something like that. And then it's resonating with me because I've transitioned from there to here. And so I don't know, I'm in shock. So I remember calling my mom and I was stunned. I was too stunned to speak. Yeah, if we had a choice, would we choose this? To be honest, I don't know. No one chooses anything. No one chooses to be born, and no one chooses to love and no one chooses the life they've led.
Can I just comment on that, Shannon? That and that question: if we had a choice, would we choose this? So thank you for your comments, Shannon, and your concerns about people who are so angry at Pride, because people there is a significant percentage of people in the world who do not like voices raised that do not reflect their own, and that's what this transphobia and other phobias are about. But to the point about choice, it's a very interesting discussion, and I know that I think Mariana, you raised it also about choice and about whether or not a child is going to outgrow this. And I think that's I know that it's really a significant question that parents ask around when their child begins to gender question, or even if their adult partner begins to question their gender. And the first thought is this just a phase? Are they going through some weird period? Should I ignore it? If I pay attention to it, will I indulge it and move them into that? Or if I ignore it, will they just let it go and maybe go back to being normal, right? And it's a very important question and an important moment for parents and for kids too when that question comes up. And I do want to echo what Shannon just said, which is that we don't make choices. I mean, when you think about it, people on the sexual orientation path, have their issues. Talking about people on the gender identity questioning path, it's a tough route. I mean, nobody would put themselves on a path of that kind of difficulty if they weren't driven to it, drawn to it, if it wasn't authentically their path to take. And so to that point, is it a choice? I think it's a choice. Where I think the choice is of giving it voice, of recognizing it, of honoring it. And again, that choice of honoring or giving voice to gender questioning has a direct correlation to the environment that one is in. So, and this can morph into the next topic of the power of family. So if one is in a family structure, a family unit, and whatever that concept of family is, whether it's a roommate in a university or a nuclear family, if they are in an environment where their questioning is being supported and it's safe, that questioning person will have more opportunity and latitude and freedom to at least give voice to their questioning. If they are in an environment, in a culture where it's accepted, then they will give voice to it. And I can tell you that in Canada, not everywhere in Canada, I'm lucky to be in Toronto, which is the most diverse city in the world. There is an allowance and an opportunity for lots of expression. Argentina, Brazil, a number of other countries, African countries, there is not that safety. There is, and so it's a fear-based environment for people who question their gender because their safety is at risk. And so giving voice has everything to do with paying attention to your authenticity and to the safety externally.
Hi, everyone. My name's Lexi. I also live in the States. I'm just a little bit north of Shannon. I live in Indiana. And it's been very interesting to hear the different perspectives. But I think that also in the States, which this hasn't been brought up necessarily, and it may be unique to the United States, gender questioning and being on the spectrum, I say the spectrum referring to the LGBTQ plus community, is very heavily tied to politics. And so typically when you're in more rural areas of the States, so that would be like where myself and Shannon are, typically going to have a less safe environment. And then in places such as New York, more urban, more diverse
California.
areas. California, thank you. California, yeah, where was I going? More diverse areas, it's tend to be a safer environment. So that is something very interesting, and it bounces off of what Suzanne was talking about. But I think it's different definitely everywhere, but I think the United States definitely has a unique kind of environment regarding this topic. So just wanted to throw that in there.
I also want to bounce off of what Lexi said. It also depends on where you are in your state. because there are suburban areas, there are country areas. So for instance, I'm in Kentucky. There are different cities in Kentucky, but there's Eastern Kentucky. People will get hate crimes in Eastern Kentucky for being potentially transgendered, gay, lesbian, and that's what happens. For instance, and as opposed to Lexington, Kentucky, that is a very diverse community, extremely diverse. There are so many different aspects to the states, to like where you are in your state, because there's a countryside to your state. Diverse, yes, diverse equals accepting, usually. So, and sometimes diverse to accepting can also mean, yeah, that's usually what it means. Because in your state, it's usually about 5 to a 7-8 hour drive between all your states. In Texas, you could be driving for about 18 hours and still be in Texas. So that's just how Texas works. Same with like California and whatnot. It takes about 3 days to get to California, 3 days to get from Colorado to Texas, to Florida, because I used to live in Colorado. So it just depends on where you are. For instance, Canyon City, Colorado, which is where I'm initially from, extremely not safe. But Denver, Colorado, very safe for the most part.
I just want to kind of address this comment in the chat, if that's okay, everyone. So just a question: diverse equals accepting, which I talked on a minute ago. I think it's not necessarily diverse communities are necessarily accepting. Typically, diverse communities are more knowledgeable and therefore understand different communities and what they need. So, for example, in my community, I was the only openly gay kid at my high school. So, therefore, I was the stereotyped gay person at my high school, versus somewhere in a larger city in Indiana. There's gonna be more than one person, if that helps you understand. So it just, I think, opens people's minds when there's more diversity, if that helps.
Mm-hmm. If I may, thank you all for this wonderful contribution. And I'll bring it to the film and my objective look into all of this. We talk about mental health, we talk about youth mental health, and this is definitely a topic that comes up to the surface every time that I have talked to people. Lexi very loud and clear expresses her views in the film about the suffering of young people through that gender question, through being accepted. And I think that it's so important to be talking about this, to open up that conversation and to see how we can support people who are different, but they are different for a reason, without judgment, right? And how do we open that conversation in a safe place? And why are these people being ostracized, even to today? And when I hear all of this cultural diversity that we are just talking about, my first film, number of decades ago, was Gloriously Free, about gay communities around the world, and how Canada had opened up the doors to people from other countries who had to leave because of sexual orientation. And they came to Canada and were able to be accepted to who they were, because we are lucky enough to live in a country that accepts diversity. It started at that point with our Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau, many years ago, who said that the government has no business in the bedrooms of the nation. And that became a very well-known line that really led me into Gloriously Free, because that's what the Gloriously Free meant. Just be yourself. And to my surprise, is that as I move into my journey of telling stories about these important topics, only about 3-4 years ago, before the pandemic, I was in Argentina, invited by the Canadian Embassy in Buenos Aires to do a presentation about Gloriously Free. And I said, this is a very old film, like we have passed all of this. And they said, no, we are dealing with this topic. And they invited a lot of people into the embassy to talk about it. And everybody was talking about the problems that they had and why they flee their countries. And it was really just the film that I had just shown. There was no difference 15 years later or almost 20 years later. And when working on connecting the dots, the topic came back again and came back again. And now Shannon tells us that this just happened yesterday. So these conversations are fundamental to be able to clean that stigma that we have. And we think that we have made progress, and I think that we have made progress. Definitely there's progress, but not to the extent that we are all expecting it, and not to the extent that we have the knowledge. And we need that education, and the work that you're doing, Suzanne, in educating parents, I think it's very important. Educating people at large to be able to understand. And we talked yesterday about diversity, and diversity is a very used. It's fashionable now to talk about diversity. It's part of the lingo. What is diversity? But as I mentioned yesterday, and I continue to think, and in the film we talk about diversity as well. If we don't know that group, we cannot be part of that group, because we're going to pose judgment. So this is it's all about coming back to roots and understanding. And I think that these conversations are what we need and what we intend with the film, to be able to open up that conversation. There's another person in the film that talks about having friends whose parents threw them out from their home. And that's something that I call it ignorance, because I don't think those parents wanted to throw that kid out of home, but they probably just didn't know how to deal with it. So what do we do about it, right? So thank you all for this wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Noemi. If I could just pick up on that last thread, because it's such an important piece around the nuclear family. And all the statistics show that young people, and I'm sure you came across these statistics in your research around mental health generally, but I can tell you specifically around gender identity, that the statistics are very clear that those young people who question their gender from the time they're 3 or 4, and just as a little caveat, much of the research shows that a child, by the time they're 4, knows what their authentic gender identity is. So those young people who are in families where in families who support them, who hear them, who honor them, child may be identified female, but if the child at 4 or 5 is saying, no, I want to be a boy, and the parents actually honor that, that child, whether they continue whether they change their move into a new gender identity, or they identify with their birth assigned gender, it almost doesn't matter, because they will continue in their life to feel honored, valued, respected, and their mental health will be significantly more intact than a child whose parents shut them down, throw them out, dissociate, right? And there is no end of stories of the latter, but it's the former that we want to create, where families, even if the parents don't support their internally or in their own dialogue, but to be able to behave in a way that's supportive for their child, has everything to do with how that child's mental health will proceed for the rest of their life. And one last piece, and then I'll turn it back to, turn it over. There are among trans communities, the statistics are very difficult to read. There is significantly higher levels of suicide, both attempted and actualized. There is significant higher levels of poverty, of homelessness, on and on. And that is ostensibly, well, I don't know every story, so I shouldn't be so emphatic, but I can certainly say that a great deal of those statistics are from are because the family and or community was not supporting or embracing of them, and they had to be on their own. Right. So mental health and gender are intrinsically interconnected. Yeah.
I wanted to jump on that because what you guys have been talking about, Suzanne, Lexi, Noemi, and Shannon, it's made me like think of two questions or two subjects maybe that I tend to reflect on. The first one has to do with more of a cultural thing, and the Spanish language. Our language is a binary language. We have articles to refer to things in feminine and things in masculine. And the English language doesn't have that. And I feel like there was this psychologist called Lev Vygotsky. He was also a linguist. And he said that how we think reflects, or how we talk reflects on how we think, because language and thought are immensely and intricately related. So I always like think about these things and how here it's been tried to establish like the letter E. Instead of saying las and los, you say les, for example, to refer to a person that is a non-binary person who doesn't, and I feel like it's tough because this, as Lexi said, the gender question has always been so associated with political parties that sometimes it's hard to separate the real essence of the conversation. It's sometimes reduced to whether you're for a candidate or for another candidate or how, and it doesn't really address the issue that we need to start acknowledging these people and their needs. And something else that makes me like that this conversation has made me reflect on is the fact that what it is to be a woman or a man. Is it, like there are also not only, like I think that the gender question goes far beyond just transgender people. It's something that we should be asking ourselves. What is it to be what defines me as a female? Is it that I play with Barbies instead that I play with cars? And I feel like it is something that does touch us all, and it comes across our lives constantly. I remember my Bolivian school didn't have a soccer team for girls because soccer was for guys, and girls didn't play soccer. And I wanted to play soccer, and I ended up playing basketball because I couldn't play soccer because I was a girl, And does playing soccer make me less of a woman? And I feel like that's changing. And I feel like, I don't know, companies like, for example, McDonald's are starting to, the toy section, before it used to be toys for boys and toys for girls. And now I feel like that's changing as well. And it does reflect on like a cultural advance maybe, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And I feel like it is something that we should be asking ourselves every day. It's not only it's for gay people, it's for trans people. Let them worry about it. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't touch me. Well, it does, because it's not, you don't always have to take it to the extreme of being questioning, or well, am I a boy or a girl? What? It's something that you live and constantly reaffirm with more than just, banal things like playing with Barbies. And I feel like we should all take time to reflect on that. And there's no shame in questioning your gender, your sexuality. It's a human thing.
I'd like to pick up on some of your comments, Mariana. In the work I do around conscious leadership, I study where is humanity in its evolution. And if we look at where is humanity in the state of the world, so many of the problems that we're facing is that humanity is at an adolescent stage of development. We, as a species, after 240 million years, haven't reached adulthood. And if we look at our actions that we take, we look at the way we treat each other. As a species, we are adolescents. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just that we haven't developed enough as a species. And we know that our consciousness has to evolve if we're going to survive as a species. We're destroying our home planet Earth. And part of the contributing factor to the need for our development as a species and our shift in consciousness is we're still thinking in a very dualistic way. And to the topic today, we think about male and female, and we think those are the only two options. And the fluidity and the spectrum that we've been talking about today it's a forcing issue to get every human being on the planet to question, how do we think? Where is our consciousness? And for individuals who are in the non-binary world, they're forcing us to think in a non-dualistic way, which will actually help with the evolution of the human species. And my heart goes out to anyone who doesn't fit into that binary way of being, and that the challenges that life throws at you. And yet you're such a gift to the human evolution and in human consciousness. And as a father of a child who's been transitioning for the last 10 years, it is such a gift for me to have my child helping me evolve my consciousness, to think beyond the non-binary way that I was raised, that I experienced the world. And so I love this conversation today. I love the discussion that's happening. And each of you, particularly the youth in this conversation, the perspectives you're bringing, the life experience, and the way you're seeing the world. And I just want to honor and thank you for participating today.
Tom, if I can just follow up briefly with your comments, thank you for that. And just as a fellow parent, I also want to acknowledge that it is, I consider my child Skylar and his journey a gift also. I speak about him as a gift. I mean, our kids are all gifts. We're all gifts. I consider his transition as a further gift because it was given, I feel like it was given to me so that I could then share it. Another reason that I ended up writing the book, and this is just a parent perspective. So I'm in my 60s, and the friends in my community are, middle class, educated, liberal thinking people, right? Nonetheless, when Skylar began his transition 12 years ago or whatever, and after I got over my initial blush of what, and then I moved into it, and it all just, rolled into his transition, and he cut his dreads off, and we had because when he was identifying as female, he had these fabulous long dreads like a life force, and we cut them off and planted them under an apple tree and had this great celebration, and we really celebrated him. My friends and people in my community who calls me Susie, they would say, wow, Susie, like, you're being so chill, like, oh my God, like, you're just like rolling with this. don't know if I could be so open if my kid was, transitioning, and they didn't use the word trans. If my kid was questioning their gender, I don't know that I would be so chill as you. And I said, what? And I was really surprised at how surprised my friends and family were at my ability to pivot with this so easily. And it was actually that moment that alerted me to the fact that I may be thinking differently, that my ability to be open and shift with this transition was not as common as I thought it was. And so what I ended up doing was before I did my book, I sent out this huge questionnaire to maybe 100 people and asked them what their thoughts were, what they knew about it, what their thoughts were, what their questions were. And I can tell you, I was a bit gobsmacked at the answers that I got. And I feel like I just began to whisper. I don't know why, because I felt that it was kind of secret information that people who were really well educated, on all different topics, were revealing a complete lack of understanding, awareness, and to a degree, curiosity, and a lack of openness to this topic. And it was the results of that questionnaire that inspired me to write this, on top of me, wanting more information. Yeah, that was 12 years ago. So anyway, I just thought I would say that the parent journey is an important one for our child and generation.
Yeah, it's really simple as a parent. You want your children to be happy, you want them to be healthy, and you want them to be safe.
Right.
And it's as hard and it's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. I noticed that Shannon has put in a comment about Two-Spirit people have been honored by Indigenous people forever. And so I just want to point out further to your comments, Noemi, about our changing culture, is that the more ancient the cultures, the more the less binary they are, and the more open to the spectrum of humanity. And that is so clear with every single Indigenous culture on the planet. So anyway,
well, something you said, Suzanne, made me think of the concept of social distancing in psychology. Social distancing is a concept that addresses that when you know someone from a group of people, for example, a group of gay people, you have the stereotype of what a lesbian person is. But when you know someone from the group, and then you know another person, and then you know another person, the prejudice and the stigma and the stereotype starts to fall apart, because you realize that they belong to a spectrum of people that can be different, and they're actual people and not just objects in your mind that you can just put all your bad thoughts to, or your maybe like not in a bad way, but what you've been raised on knowing them for. And so I feel like representation is so important, and your community was probably different before your son transitioned, and I'm sure it's different now that they have someone, that they've seen someone go through that, and that they can start reflecting on this, because maybe they, you made the survey before and then never addressed the subject again, but maybe it would be interesting to ask them again after years and after knowing what you and your family have been through and how you've taken it. I think it would be really interesting to ask them again and to take the survey again to see if having one person that they know has been through that, if that was something that they took and they reflected and they were able to change and to, talk about these things and maybe not be so close-minded, or because I feel like when something happens in your community, in your family, you're forced to talk about it. You just can't not do it anymore. And that maybe for some people is not as impactful, but for some others it really is. And it might be the example that they were needing for them to talk about maybe issues that were similar in their families, or something different, or maybe sexuality or other things that were hidden. And the bravery and authenticity of your son was the kickstart for them to start talking about, maybe.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mariana, for sharing that, and for everyone for your reflections. I think it's given us so much to think about, and these conversations are really nuanced and complex. So it's nice to be able to share space and it be safe, and be able to ask these questions and have these really important conversations. Unfortunately, we are at our time for today for this panel discussion, although I wish we could stay all day. There is an after chat, which is going to be wonderful, where conversations can continue to happen. I'm going to pause there and hand it back over to Jim, but I really wanted to thank each and every one of you for what you've shared, and again, for that space we've created today. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you, all of you, for a very nuanced conversation about a very complex subject that is new for humanity. If you think about it, I was just thinking about, Tom, your experience as a father, and Suzanne as a mother, being confronted through your child about something you'd never really thought about, in your whole life. And that's the magnitude of the challenge that we're trying to absorb through this. And one of the questions I have, just as another parent, is how did this, going through this experience with your two children, how did it change your appreciation of what it meant to be a parent? How did you personally grow as a result of it?
Go ahead, Suzanne.
Yeah, thank you. And then I'll send it on to you, Tom. That's a really great question, Jim. I would say that so many thoughts are coming to me, but the first thing I would say is that it stopped me. It created
can imagine
a new pace, a new awareness. It required that I take a different, I have a different relationship to all the relationships in the family, they become more intentionally honoring. They become more intentional. That's what I would say. I paid attention more intentionally to how each of, certainly Skylar, and then my older, I can't say my older daughter anymore, my daughter Lauren, is in the world. So I would just say that word intentional. I became more intentionally conscious of their inner world, and shifted out of just generally parenting and supporting safety, health, food, fun, whatever, and became more aware and tuned into their inner world.
Tom?
Yeah, I think for me, there were lots of complexities to the conversation and the transition, in that my child knew at age 3 that they were in the wrong body, but didn't share that with me until they were 18. And so for 15 years, they had been living with this experience of knowing they were in the wrong body, but didn't, for whatever reason, share that with me. So that's certainly a complexity. My wife had died I guess, probably about 8 years before my child started the transition process. So I was on the journey with them alone, which, you know, has its benefits and challenges. And it is a transition. You know, there is no destination to get to, or at least in the case of my child, we were, you know, exploring surgery, we were exploring medications, we were exploring pronouns, we were exploring name, and there is no end destination to get to. And so it you know, transition is an appropriate word in so many ways, because there's not a beginning and an end, to so to speak. And so, you know, each phase, each decision set off a whole string of other decisions to be made. And, you know, how did a choice by one of my children affect my other children? How did it affect my nuclear family and my wife's nuclear family? And so there's a whole ripple effect of making a choice. And so in each of those choice points, you know, it requires that I had to think about what are the implications of this. And certainly my child has gone through that same process of identity and who are they. And so, you know, for me, it's, as I said before, it's been an incredible gift of me questioning, what do I believe and why do I believe it? I mean, it's shaking my consciousness and helping expand my consciousness.
Yeah. You know, I was just reflecting on my own experience just for a moment. Then I want to ask you, young women, a question. You know, I'm heterosexual male, married to a heterosexual wife. We had 2 sons that were hetero, but in the periphery, there was all kinds of things going on that were brought into our household. And I remember it hit me when a friend of ours who had a daughter that grew up with our sons, and like your daughter, Tom, knew that she was in kind of the wrong body, but didn't kind of acknowledge it for many, many years. And then finally decided, you know, I want to be a man. And she went off to UC Santa Cruz and was starting a relationship with a young man her age, who since the same early age had realized that he was a woman. And they had a deep kind of appreciative relationship of mutual support. And I remember when I was told that, it kind of stopped my world. I realized I was being confronted by a reality I had never even imagined or considered before. And I became very vulnerable, and I would say shy about, you know, when I would talk to a gay or lesbian person or whatever, I realized I was on the edge of the abyss of the unknown. I had just sort of no idea and no equipment with which to, I didn't even know what it meant to be authentic in the face of these facts. So I became very, you know, as an alpha male, I became very, very tentative, and I didn't avoid it, but I was full of uncertainty, and I think that sort of leads to my question to Lexi and Mariana and Michaela. Anything you want to add? You know, as young people, you know, carrying this shape shifting that's happening now, that you're representing on behalf of the species, because I think when all is said and done, our species is going to look a lot different 30 to 50 years from now, and we will appreciate the pioneering work that you're doing, because you're really the vanguard of what we don't have time to go into it, but I believe to be the most fundamental evolutionary shift going on right now, because I think it's the expression of eros. in a time of thanatos. Look around, there's death all over the place. And this is the way the life force, the life process is expressing the vitality of eros in our time. But I would just wonder, as you understand these things and you go through your experience, what do you really need from us? What can we do, as inexperienced as we are, to really help you along this journey? Would love to hear your thoughts.
I think for me, and everyone's going to be different. So, I mean, you'll have different experiences, but the biggest thing that I've learned is that everyone is going to have a different perspective, and that's okay. But just to remain open-minded and be willing to learn is the biggest thing you can do as an ally, because like you said, it's constantly changing. So, if you're willing to learn and keep an open mind, I think that's number one. That's amazing. That's awesome. I think that's the best thing that you can do. And then you'll have those tools in your toolbox, and then maybe you won't feel like you're on the edge of your seat so much.
That's a comforting thought.
I agree. I agree. Lexi put it beautifully. I agree. I think being willing to learn and respect, I think those are the main things. And the rest just comes, and, for us, I think, at least I'm going to talk about myself. For me, I don't expect everyone to be immediately okay with me, not only my sexuality, but just with me in general. Just have, I think we all have different things that we like or dislike, or that are different about everyone. And it's not only these subjects, but I think that if we all remain respectful and open-minded about someone else, and knowing that someone else has their own world, their own universe, their own things that they went through, and sometimes their behavior right now is reflecting on the things that they went through. Not be so judgmental, and just keep an open mind to get to know the other person, but to get to really know them. I think that's the best thing we can all do.
Beautiful.
I'd like to make one more point too, and this harkens back, Jim, to some of your opening words, comments, and that is your reference to language. I think that when we begin to be open to whether you decide you want to be an ally or not, simply being open to the conversation and hearing how this conversation goes will then allow you to hear and receive and maybe even learn new language. In this case, the language around gender is certainly changing. At the very base, the use of the word "they" and has fussed so many people because it's not, it's impinging on our grammatical conventions, and so it's really created so many discussions, angry ones and difficult ones. But the idea of integrating and at least understanding the language of this conversation will benefit our understanding of what this is, regardless of what our relationship to it is, whether we embrace the ideas or not. Simply being aware of and integrating some of the new language and terms is really valuable, which is why just hearkening back to my book, I was very specific about including a bit of a dictionary of sorts, so that just to highlight some of the words, words like gender dysphoria is a new phrase that is now in the world that people didn't know before, because it's now part of the medical phraseology. Right, but just even the word, and I don't know, I think it was Lexi who referred to it, the word spectrum, even talking about gender as being a spectrum of identity, that's a whole new phrase, right? So, right, so I wanted to really emphasize that.
Yeah, well, that's the force of what's being brought into our awareness. It's shattering our language, and it's forcing us through language to conceive new thoughts.
if I can just comment on one verb, I wouldn't say shattering. If I may, I would say expanding.
Yeah, better.
Yeah, it's broadening. Yeah.
Yeah, what I was thinking in my head was it's filling old wineskins with new wine.
Oh,
but you're right. It's expanding and reworking how we describe what we're experiencing.
Right.
And that's how humans kind of consolidate advances, is through language, because that shapes so profoundly how we view the world. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So how you language reality is one of the most important things we humans do.
Yes.
And the gender fluidity that is taking place. So that's a very profound point, Suzanne. Thank you. Shannon, is there anything you wanted to add? And then Michaela?
I think Lexi and Mariana, they all put it perfectly.
Cool. They did indeed. Thank you. Michaela, any comment you want to make, and then maybe talk to us a little bit about what's going to take place tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. I can do that. I think all the reflections thus far have been spot on. The one thing that I would say too is, as we're becoming curious and as we're learning in this world, I would say that I've had a lot of conversations with loved ones in my life just around the importance of being mindful of the language that we use, being mindful of as we're learning and sometimes thinking out loud. It can be really important to be mindful of you never know who's in the room with us, what they're internally facing, who's waiting for an invitation to talk about things, or waiting to learn what your perspective is on a certain topic, gender identity. And even if you're not, even if you don't think that you're directly talking to someone who is going through something, whether it be gender questioning or otherwise, that, words matter, and how you talk even passively helps to, or even how you talk passively creates, an environment, and either enables the environment or kind of creates a barrier to the environment. So I think, just being mindful of that. I know I've had a lot of conversations with my mother, for instance. She has the best heart, she has the greatest perspectives, but sometimes she'll be thinking out loud and it's like, ooh, that can be perceived as offensive, or that to me, I would put my guard up, or, if I was gender questioning. So I think, just being mindful of, you never know who's in the room, and you might think, that everyone in the room identifies as a certain way, but you really don't know, and someone could be waiting for that invitation. So that's something that was coming to mind as I was hearing folks talk. In terms of tomorrow, switching gears a little bit, we have a very important conversation around the environment and anxiety, and joined by many special guests who we'll talk about in a moment. But to give a little background, tomorrow will be a critical conversation, as the scientific data and many global scientific leaders have determined that this is the most critical decade in human history. If we don't significantly course correct, our lives, our other species on the planet will be forever changed. Today's youth understand the reality and the significance for the future that they will inherit. And this harsh reality is contributing to what has been termed environmental anxiety. So finding hope in these seemingly desperate times is absolutely essential. Parents, education, political industry, NGOs, and other leaders have a responsibility to provide today's youth with a sense of hope. So as mentioned, this conversation is not one to be missed. We will be joined by a variety of amazing panelists, including but not limited to Dr. Jane Goodall, who, as you may know, came to world recognition in the 60s through research on chimpanzees that was made famous through profiles in National Geographic. It was Dr. Jane Goodall who transformed the world's perception of animals from its to he and she with names and personality and innate worth. So she went on to champion animal rights and also founded Roots and Shoots, a global organization of youth working with environmental and social justices. So again, not one to be missed. I'll take pause there. Noemi, I see your hand up, so I can pass it off to you if you'd like.
I just want to thank everybody. Thank you, Michaela, for that wonderful summary of where we've been and where we are going. And thanks everyone. Suzanne, it's been a pleasure to have you with us, share your wisdom and your book and your insight into the topic. The same with Mariana and Lexi and Shannon, and of course, Tom and Jim. I just want to round it up and bring it back to why we are here, sharing, connecting the dots, and the fact that Lexi, who is the one who opens up the conversation in the film about gender and respect and language and all of this, is a testimony of the type of conversations that we have after a screening. And when we produced the Facilitators Guides in partnership with UNICEF and really took the film apart into every testimony, we talked about how important it is that each testimony, be it one sentence of each of these young people, could actually take us into a 90-minute or more conversation. Today, we just proved it. We just proved that by taking the spin of what Lexi had said in the film, we are actually talking about this topic, which is so, so important. It has led us into conversations around the world in various different languages. We are in Serbia right now talking about all of this. We've been in Australia, we are in Cape Town this week as well. It's just been everywhere, and Latin America very strongly as well. There is no country in the world that is not being related to the topics that we are talking. And your participation and your wisdom and your eloquence in bringing that conversation to life is wonderful. So I wanted to thank you all and to hope that whoever is listening to us will continue to join us in this effort of opening up the conversation, trying to make the world a better place. For young people, for older people, for parents, for educators, for everyone in our society who deserves to be respected for who they are, using the right language and communicating in a world that mental health is considered a topic of conversation without that stigma that surrounds us for so many years. And the same, obviously, for gender equality and respecting each other for who they are. So thank you so much. Join us at connectingthedotsfilm.com. Bring the film to your community, to your school, and open up that conversation. We'll be here to help you.
Thank you, Noemi. Yes,
it's been a pleasure to be here.
Something?
I just wanted to say, sorry, it's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to share with you all. It's been a really big pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. One closing thought on my part, just as a way of expressing my gratitude. You know, if you think about this at its deepest level, in my view, that the emerging gender fluidity and sexual fluidity as an expression of eros at a time of thanatos, it's the life force at a moment when, as Michaela just said, we're about ready to lose it. We're about ready to lose it all because we're not paying attention to the climate. You get a measure of how important gender fluidity actually is. It's not just something happening at the margins. It's something that is an essential way that our life force is seeking to revivify and regenerate who we are as human beings. And I think the note that I want to close us out on, this very, very profound discussion, is that eros, at its deepest level, is love. what's bursting out of our young is love. And if you think of the stories that you've heard, you have to love yourself very intensely in order to go through what you have to go through to become most authentically who you are. And for parents, you've got to love very deeply in order to expand your categories and boundaries of who you love and how you love. So the note in closing is that we're being challenged by love here, for love, to enable all of us to love more widely, more deeply, and ultimately without judgment. That, in my view, is what's happening here. So I want to, in that spirit, Lexi and Shannon and Mariana and Michaela, salute you for the love that you're embodying. And Suzanne and Tom, I want to salute you as parents for the love that you were able to express in the widest way to support your own child and those of her peers or his peers. And Noemi, hats off to you. You have done a remarkable thing through this film, even generating this conversation today on Humanity Rising. It wouldn't happen without this documentary. So I just want to acknowledge as we close Noemi Weis as a remarkable woman of our time. And Suzanne, I want to applaud your book and thank you all, Tom, everything that you all are doing. In the end, it's all about love. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow with Jane Goodall and others for the fourth program on our human journey for deeper awareness of how we support our young. Bye for now.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you, Jim. So beautifully